another edition of Wrestling with Faith, regardless of what platform you are watching and or listening to. Welcome, wherever you are in the world. You can get us at Twitter, faith_wrestling, or on YouTube, youtube.com/Wrestling with Faith UK, and also facebook.com/Wrestling with Faith UK. And very, very, very blessed to have a man who has really got his finger on the pulse of all things wrestling. You name the mainstream organization of wrestling and promotion, this man has got his finger right on the pulse, and he's got all the proof to back that up. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guest, and the most important question I'm going to ask him today is Dom DeAngelo. How are you doing today, my friend?
Dave, I'm great, man. It's awesome to get to speak with you. I was very excited when you reached out, and it's a unique concept. I'm very excited to talk to you today. So thanks for having me.
Not a problem at all. Thanks for taking the time to come on. So it's at the moment, whilst we're doing this, we're looking at around about 6:10 in the evening in the UK. What time is it where you're based?
It is 1:10 right now. So quite the difference.
Not too bad at all. So as I'm winding down, you're sort of waking up and getting ready to go for the rest of the day. So that's brilliant. Awesome. So Dom, let's just go straight into it. You are obviously a leading journalist. Let's just call it how it is in the world of all things wrestling. You've worked for many of the well-known organizations that have also print as well as online content. Just to obviously cover some of those, Pro Wrestling Torch, WrestleZone, and obviously Wrestling Inc. as well. So let's start from the beginning. How did you get, first of all, where did the passion for wrestling come from?
Well, yeah, I came back. Back when I was about 5 years old, I remember being a fan of like Hulk Hogan. And then just changing away from that, like I got out of wrestling for a little bit, and about 5 years later, I was flipping through the channels and I saw WWF again, and there was Razor Ramon, and he got me hooked big time. And so I became a fan again. Kind of fell out of it again for maybe about a year, something like that, not maybe even a few months. But then here I see him in WCW as Scott Hall, and NWO really clicked off for me. And pun not intended, but then it went on. And so, ever since then, I've been an avid follower, and I would tune in as much as possible. When I got to college, I kind of took a little bit of a hiatus from it, but I would always keep my tabs on the pulse of it. And then from there, I went to journalism school. Like that was my profession, or my choice of profession there in college, and completed there with a degree in journalism, and then didn't pursue it. Did not pursue it, was more into theater and acting, and wanted to kind of go in that. And I was like, well, journalism will kind of be a backup plan for me. And so moved to Philadelphia, did some theater there, struggled with money, finances, all that stuff, got an actual adult job, got laid off from that job, spent there about 5 years. And then I moved to Pittsburgh. Didn't know what to do with my life. You talk about mental health and stuff like that. It hit a really extremely low point in my life at that point. And then I applied to Whole Foods of all places. Got a job there, just doing cashier work, then working in produce eventually. And here, it kind of worked out where the book editor for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette came through my line when I was a cashier. And I was like, oh, you're the book editor? You work for the Post-Gazette? And he's like, yeah, I'm a book editor. I was like, oh, I do some writing and stuff like that. At that time, too, I contributed to the PW Torch and just gave some opinion pieces and certain things like that. And then I actually turned it into doing podcast recaps. They used to have a little site on there, I think PW Podcast it was called, and I would do their podcast recaps. And so Wade Keller would post them on there and everything like that. But so I was like, well, he's like, do you do book reviews? And I was like, well, I do podcast recaps. And he's like, well, give me your information. He's like, I'll send me an email tomorrow and everything like that. So I did. And he started coming in, and he would come in on regular, and he would drop books off for me, and I would start doing book reviews. And he was like, you're a good writer. And I was like, I am. I had no idea that I was a decent writer at this point and anything like that. And he was like, he's like, yeah, he's like, would you be interested in doing this on a regular? And so I did, and it would get in the paper, it would get online. So it kind of really cultivated me to start writing more. And so I did a blog for a Pittsburgh-based blog. And then my buddy like kind of gave me almost like a come to Jesus meeting where it was just like, hey, you know what? You should really get paid to do some of this. I got paid to do the Post Gazette. It wasn't a lot, but
Okay.
It was like, you should really invest your time in trying to get paid and doing something you like. And so sure enough, WrestleZone I looked at WrestleZone and they had a application process. And at first I was just contributing, doing ROH recaps and things like that. But Nick Hausman, who now also works at Wrestling Inc., he worked at WrestleZone at the time, and he was like, well, "Are you interested in maybe hopping on for a shift full time? Not full time, but doing the work." And so I was like, "Yeah," and a paid opportunity, and it was WrestleMania, whatever the one was in New Orleans, whatever number that was, 32, I think. I don't know, I
Yeah,
can't
yeah, I
remember.
was going to say 32, 33, something like that. Yeah, yeah.
One of those numbers. And
Yeah.
so he gave me a call on the way back, and so it all started from there. And then, yeah, I started just doing daily coverage, what I do now, basically for Wrestling Inc. But at WrestleZone, I did a lot of. Bill Pritchard ended up being my editor there for a while, and he was an
Wow.
excellent boss and everything. And so, it gave me opportunity to do creative features, do shows, get interviews. Like I really cut my teeth doing interviews at WrestleZone, and so then an opportunity came to work for Wrestling Inc. I parted ways with WrestleZone. Still kind of do some volunteer stuff here and there with them, like podcast shows. Like I do a show with Robert DeFelice called The Job Guys. We do that on just casually. And then, but yeah, Wrestling Inc. And then I also do work for adfreeshows.com too. I got to cultivate a relationship with Conrad Thompson while at doing the Starcasts. And he gave me a lot of opportunity to connect with him and do press stuff and things like that. And then it ended up cultivating into a social media work. So Kliq This, I do social media for Kliq This, Kevin Nash's podcast.
Kevin Nash.
Yep. And then I also help out with Kurt Angle's podcast, Kurt Angle Show. And then what's the other one I do? I'm dabbling and helping with Briscoe and Bradshaw as well. They've been great to work with. But I used to help out with Matt Hardy's podcast. Still collaborate with Road Dogg's podcast as well. So it's a very fun dynamic there. So, dude, it's been very rewarding so far. The whole
You're
journey
literally
of it all.
just living out like all the mates who I grew up with at school. You're just living out their dream. Do you know what I mean? It literally is just like it's full on fanboy material. I mean, this is excellent. I mean, there's no coincidences with God. I always say that as a Christian, there's no coincidences with God. You were meant to be a cashier at that point when that guy came into your life and then just credited you for the writing and everything just, oh man, it's been a blessing ever since. I mean, you know, the fact that you've got to work with the likes of obviously Pritchard, you know, Kurt Angle, obviously Big Sexy, Kevin Nash, and you know, Matt Hardy as well. You know, I mean, these are names that are still synonymous and have been synonymous with wrestling in the past 20, 30 years and have all been involved in high profile storylines, high profile matches, some of the best gimmick matches at some of the best pay-per-views we've seen as well. So these guys are like just no mean feat, sort of fly by night. These guys, this is why people still know who they are, because they've reinvented themselves. They've had to change their styles and adapt as they got older, which I suppose in many ways is like you as a journalist. You had to start from small beginnings and then sort of broaden your horizons and then start maybe backing yourself as well to think, yeah,
Yeah.
I can do this.
Yeah, no, it was definitely it was a lot of just kind of power through it. Like a lot of the apprehension too that would come would be like, oh, I originally was a perfectionist. Like I was like, oh, if I'm going to do something, I have to do it right and it has to be executed the right way the first time, you know, and that's can always be a hindrance. It was for me for quite some time. I don't know if that was just how I was raised to kind of think in that kind of manner where like just not taking the opportunities to do certain things. But then, you know, at some point I was just like, you know what, just do it. And therapy very much helped with that. And I still go to a therapist today. And it was to be able to just be like, okay, it's out there, and you know, this is what it is, and just being open to criticism, good and bad,
Yeah.
whether it's
Yeah.
constructive or deconstructive, because you're going to get both. And so you kind of just embrace that other side of it and laugh it off, because people will have their opinions and maybe they're right, maybe they're not right. But what's funny is, like, it's, and you dismiss them. You also kind of, I empathize in certain ways with it,
Mm-hmm.
because I know how that feeling is when you're not doing what you want. But I didn't never really would perpetuate such kind of comments to other people online or anything like that. But I certainly empathize with that kind of where that person's probably at in their life, and
Yeah. Yeah.
what they aren't necessarily doing, or maybe the limitations that they've had, and that just being in a bad spot. And
Absolutely.
so all of that, once you kind of get past all that kind of stuff and you kind of willing to throw yourself out there, it's definitely rewarding. And yes, with God, I figure, I'm with you on that. And it's like, I'm not somebody that very attends church very often or anything like that, but I always keep him in mind, and I know that he is looking out, and, like, it's a matter of, like, just moving on and doing, and he gives you opportunity to do stuff, and you can take it, and sometimes you don't, but if you don't, you'll learn something else at a certain point in time too. It's a matter of just embracing the opportunities, facing some of your fears, and going on to that. So and keeping it in mind that, like, yeah, I've been through some low points, personally, and things like that, where I've always, like, leaned on God, and yeah, there'd be times where it would be like questioning what the heck's going on too, and
Yeah.
wondering, and that would always push back. Like, a lot of I have OCD. I'm diagnosed with OCD, and
Okay.
so my early bouts of that were very faith based and everything like that, where it would push back, and, like, I would have these intrusive, horrible thoughts, when it came to religion and certain things like that, and it would scare me. I'd be like, what is going on? Why am I having dealing with all this kind of thing?
I
And
can relate
so,
to that. Yeah.
yes, and faith was, and it still pushes back, like, sometimes, and things like that. I'm positive, but I'm very cynical internally. Like,
Yeah.
I don't express that very much,
I've
but
heard it comes with age, Dom. So I don't know if
yes.
that's what I
So
get told anyway.
I get very cynical. Like, when I see something, I'm always like, I don't know about that. Or, like, so it's like kind of trying to break that out and not really kind of be self-evaluating so much, self-analytical. But
Yeah.
yes, so yeah, a lot of that, my stuff, really initiated with religion. I'll even use a couple examples. Like, I remember, like, scrupulosity would really come into play, or certain things, like, we had a picture of Jesus on our wall on our steps in the living room when I was growing up. It was great. It's my favorite portrait of Jesus and stuff like that. It's just because it's, I don't know, it's just really direct. He's, like, looking. It's, like, really, really cool. Anywho, I would constantly, anytime I'd have to pass it, I would have to do the sign of the cross.
Mhm.
Or I remember too, like, anything scrupulous. If I thought about something, like, for example, like flipping on a light, like,
Yeah.
I would have to kind of go back and forth and do that again. Like, I was
Okay.
compulsed to do that, because
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
think, God, if I did something and had a bad thought, God was going to punish me, certain things
Yeah.
like that. It was a lot of stuff. I was dealing with a lot.
But that's
And
what
so,
religion does to you, though, doesn't it? That's what religion does. Because religion, as you probably know, like learned growing up, as I did, I thought there were certain criteria, certain hoops that you had to jump through, certain things that you had to just obey and put in order. Otherwise, God's going to give you the spirit of slap as opposed to
yes.
the Holy Spirit. And and when you look at it and you actually study the word and you actually get invested in good churches, and because let's be honest, there's a lot of bad Christian churches out there and a lot of bad Christian leaders. Let's just call it how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially in the school system as well. I don't know if it's the same in the US, but over here in the UK, it's very poor at best. It's very, very poor. The right practice, the right teachings of God is quite abysmal, right across the board of England and Wales. And um, but that's your perception, isn't it? As you grow up, you think if that's where the older people, the elders, are teaching us that, then that's got to be how God is. And it's only when you take time out to get invested in the word and get with true believers that you think, hang on a minute, man, I've got it wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, very much. I grew up Catholic, and I still kind of traditionally kind of consider myself Catholic and stuff like that. But I don't, it's a lot of like, and I guess people sometimes like, I don't know if Catholics call themselves this, but there's cafeteria Catholics where you kind of like pick and choose, or you show up on certain days. Creasters, I think we were called to Christmas and Easter, you show up with mass. But I was an altar boy, all that stuff. But like it's like I've kind of cultivated, I think, my own relationship with God in certain ways that I'm comfortable
Brilliant.
to, maybe adapt some of my Catholic faith into that, but also it's a relationship, and to do certain things, or to say, and saying certain prayers maybe help, but it's also like, all right, I know, like, even if I don't say a prayer outright or do something, it doesn't necessarily mean, one thing or the other,
It
and
doesn't.
so,
You've still got
and
that relationship with God, whether you pray once a day or 50 times a day, whether you
mhm.
tithe every time you go to church, whether you don't. It this is the relationship with God is the relationship with God. And it, like you've just alluded to there, it has to be personal and not a copy and paste relationship, because
Right.
otherwise
Mhm.
it's phony. Just like a relationship with another person. If you doppelganger somebody else, you're not going to have that same chemistry with that other person, man. It's just impossible. And I believe, I don't know if you do as well, that it's the same with our relationship with God. It has to be unique between me and him.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I
And
mean?
it's different for everybody too, is the thing, is like, you find that out, is it's like, and I feel too like a lot of people, what I really like is when I talk to people about their faith, or like, I've interviewed wrestlers that I know that are strong in their faith, and they give their
Mm.
perspective and things like that. And I think it's cool too, like, and a lot of times you learn, like, people do not, there's that balance of like, you want, if somebody does not necessarily believe or have that certain thing, you don't want to put pressure on them, because you look at it from, God's perspective, or how you would pitch it. And not that you're selling God to anybody,
No,
but
no.
but in certain ways, you're just like, all right, if you just act who you are and be who you are, that can form a relationship. And you just hope for the best. If somebody like has some like animosity towards God or faith or anything like that, you just hope for the best for them. And like, they're going to be on a path, and God loves them still, no matter what. And,
Amen.
even I've come to the thing too, like, atheism and anything like that. I'm just like, you know what? We don't, if we, by the time we get up there, we don't know what God's plans are. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And so it's like, so if somebody does not believe in God, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to go to heaven. I don't know how you feel, but I kind of feel that way. It's just like, God loves you no matter what. And I
Yeah,
think,
100%. I mean, look,
yeah,
Jesus went to the cross for everybody, not just for a
right,
select amount of people and not just for a certain clique or a group. Do you know what I mean? And,
right.
and from that as well is that I think people get curious about, like, certainly in my life, people who I've worked with, become friends with, have got curious about faith when asking me about it, by seeing the changes that God's put in my life, and how that's changed me, and how my thought processes and how my attitude is to. And listen, it's a work in progress. It's nowhere
Oh, it
near
is.
finished. And that's what generates curiosity, as opposed to saying, listen, dude, I've been baptized in the Holy Spirit. I think it'll work for you as well.
Yeah.
It's too full on, man. It needs to be a
Right,
gradual
right.
thing. And I think that's the best way to it. I mean, look, I wasn't always a believer, but I got saved. People get saved like before the last breath. So there's always that opportunity, I believe, for anyone to be curious and step out in faith, and to ask as well. So yeah, man. I mean, that's brilliant, and the fact that that's obviously helped you with your mental health as well. Your spirituality has come through, obviously, in that. By the sounds of it, that's been a really big factor. Along with, from that, the progression as well through your journalism. I mean, from working in a checkout to interviewing the likes of Jim Ross,
Yeah.
Eric Bischoff, Becky Lynch. I
Yeah.
mean, that's worlds apart, man. Unless they're shopping in the same store as you, you're not going to get that opportunity, are you? So, I mean, that's brilliant. I mean, looking at that as well, obviously you've alluded to the fact, and I've spoke to wrestlers on podcasts as well about their faith. when you've been interviewing people in the world of wrestling, you know, past and present, what's been, not like saying you've got any favorites, but what was the sort of the light bulb interview for you that you thought, wow, this was not how I thought it was going to go, or this person's so much different to how I thought they really would be?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I mean, always the highlight. The highlight interview for me is still like I got to interview Terry Funk. And
Wow.
yeah, and so it was all audio interview over the phone and things like that. It was during the pandemic, I got a hold of his book and I read it, and I was like, dude, it's a bucket list to try to get an interview Terry Funk somehow. I was like,
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
love to talk to him about his book, and so I was sending messages to people that maybe might know or certain things like that to try to get a hold of him. Sure enough, Dave Meltzer was the one who gave me his phone number, like
Wow.
direct. Just it was funny too because I wrote this whole like letter out to Dave and be like, listen, I just love the interview. The response I got was just Terry Funk's phone number. That was it, nothing else. So I was like, hey,
What more did
okay,
you need?
right. So I contacted. So the one day morning, I contacted Terry. I was on my back porch, and it was sure enough, it was Terry Funk, and like I was like, yeah, I'd love to interview you and things like that. He's like, well, let's plan for it. He's like, how? And so we picked out a day. Sure enough, I sat and talked with him probably for about an hour and 15 minutes. And
Wow.
it was just Terry was the nice person, like so kind, very accommodating, loved it. It's funny as you see him sometimes. And
Yeah, yeah.
so that I think for that, like not necessarily, and I kind of when like I go back to the cynicism point, I a
Hmm.
lot of the times when I approach people or try to ask them, and this still holds true for me now, is like I'm immediately thinking that they're going to be on the defensive, and I'm like impeding their kind of getting in the way in certain ways. I
Yeah,
still
yeah.
feel that way.
Yeah.
So I know so many times I'm way more often than not, I'm like relieved because the person will, is totally open or totally nice or a lot different than what I would think they would be or how they would react to me. So there is that. Like, so I think that happens with everybody. And I think just, but yeah, I think to your point, like, Terry's a big one. Probably some of my earlier interviews too, was really good. Like I interviewed the Rascals at the time. They were one of my first interviews, and they were in Japan. It was
Wow.
all three of them:
Yeah.
Wes Lee, who's in NXT now, Trey
Yeah.
Miguel, and then Zachary Wentz. And they were all in
Wow.
kimonos. They all got together for it. It was really neat. And so kind of relating to them in that regard was really, really fun. So
That's
I
awesome.
would say and different impressions, it's a lot of you get to correspond with some of these people, and that it's like I always tell people, don't judge people online for what you think of them online or how they're portrayed online, because it's very important to meet somebody to kind of get your own take on them. And
I think so as well. I mean, just to back that point, I mean, there are certain people within the industry, and I think sometimes the IWC has difficulty separating the character from the person,
mm-hmm.
which it blows my mind because let's be honest, wrestling, although it's very, very physical, you have to be fit, you have to be knowledgeable, you have to know how to not hurt yourself as well as your opponent and make sure there is that chemistry there as well. There's a lot that goes into it other than just lights, camera, action, right, get in the ring, go. Is that there's certain people like, for example, I think Sammy Guevara gets a really bad rap
Oh yeah.
online,
Mm-hmm.
mega
Mm-hmm.
heat, like to the point where he even stopped doing his vlog for a period of
Yes.
time because you could see mentally it was crushing him. And yes, he plays the part of a heel. Yes, he knows how to wind the crowd up and things like that. But I think that there was just a lot of genuine negative rub on the back of that as well. And that's just one example of over like many over the decades as well. I mean, some of the more high profile ones, Hogan, as Hulk Hogan's had his more than his fair share of grief. I would say that everybody in obviously the Kliq, I mean, Kevin Nash could probably verify that at some point that him, Scott, X Pac, and a lot of other people sort of around that sort of area, Shawn Michaels as well, got like serious, like nasty heat, not even
Yeah.
like just playful online, like genuine or awful heat. And I think sometimes, like you say, it's learning to find that balance of, do you know what? I can switch off when the show's over because I know that this probably isn't who they are in real life. Because if they were like this, they probably won't get very far in their career.
Right.
And and it's good to obviously speak to people because you're speaking to people from different generations of wrestling. Terry Funk, you know, aka Chainsaw Charlie,
Yeah. Yeah.
all, and then now you're going to like obviously speaking to people like Trey Miguel, Wes
Hmm.
Lee, who are very, very, not just generationally different, but styles, attitude, personas different. Do you find that the speaking to different generations of wrestlers, you get different kind of context and outlook on it, or do they have various things in common?
Very much so, I do. I kind of, for my own personal preference with wrestling, I kind of do subscribe to what a lot of the veteran talent and how they envision wrestling in certain ways. So, like if I'm interviewing, a younger star, even way younger than me, even or anything to that effect, I there's some philosophical differences that I might feel like, oh, okay, but I do understand kind of like that mentality. And geez, heck, I didn't grow up the same time that they did, and it's a different perspective of how they perceive wrestling and things like that. But I think it's yes, you definitely see that kind of jump. It's kind of refreshing too when you see a younger talent. And I've interviewed him before, but he's always been in character as somebody like an MJF who's
Right.
subscribes to the older mindset of ways. And I always think that's super cool
Old
when
head on young shoulders. Yeah.
yes, when you have that kind of thing, that thought process, be like, you know what, they did a little bit more research than kind of what maybe if you grew up strictly with WWE because WCW was shut down by
Of
then
course.
they kind of dive back. Another person that's like that is Ricky Starks, who did that as well.
Yeah.
Like I remember him sharing, and this was even way before my time. He shared something on social media. It was a match between Wild Bull Curry and Johnny Valentine. And so I watched it and
Wow.
I was like, dude, that's super old school. And like, I could totally see why he liked it. And I just thought that was super refreshing to see. But in a lot of ways, you do see it. And like for the betterment of wrestling, I kind of hope that a lot of younger talent does kind of dive back a little bit into the legacy of wrestling because there's so many fascinating ways to tell a story.
It
So,
really is. And like during lockdown, when I was interviewing, like, indie wrestlers from the States and from Canada, and even I had the privilege of interviewing Zach Knight, who's
mhm.
obviously Sister Saraya,
Yeah.
obviously now well within the AEW ranks as well. And during the lockdown, it was interesting speaking to guys of that sort of roughly that age group, especially during lockdown when there were no shows, there was nothing happening, how they would even go back to watching the championship wrestling that we used to have in the UK, like Big Daddy,
Yeah,
Giant
Big Daddy and
Haystacks,
all.
Kendo
Roller.
Nagasaki,
Hmm.
Mick McManus, even Fit Fighting Finley, who obviously did eventually transition to WWE as well. And, and how they even studied the old school effects of that wrestling and how during lockdown it was like, yeah, we could really amalgamate certain styles here and stuff like that. So there's a lot to be said, I think. And I think, like you just said, it's really, really refreshing, but it's nice to see that the new generational talent are just not the aforementioned Generation Z, where they're just going to stay in
Exactly.
their own bubble. And they are going to look back and say, what made these guys great? Why are people still invested in DVDs and Blu-rays and researching these old school wrestlers? Why are their figures so hot? Why is Chella took a chance on like branching out with Giant Haystacks figures, Big Daddy figures, and you know why? Because a lot of these guys paved the way for the way things are now. These weren't just wrestlers, but these were big personalities, really big characters as well. And I'm sure you can, agree to an extent the fact that you do not have to be a great wrestler in any style, whether it's grapple, mat, high flying, whatever that may be. But if you've got a great character and a great personality and a great gimmick, that can take you further than being a great wrestler and vice versa as well.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it's like you see some of these guys, over with big personalities, and like so many times I'll see that on screen. I'm trying to just an immediate one that pops to my mind is Real One Enzo. Is he's like
Yeah.
amazing on the mic. He's not known for his in-ring work whatsoever, but like he makes me draw eyes to him because of what he says on the mic and how he handles himself. And it's just like
Yeah.
the wrestling aspect to me is the icing on the cake to what I like about wrestling in a lot of ways. Like I love Scott Hall because he had charisma. It's
Yeah.
just like,
Massive.
but he was a great wrestler too at the same moment. But it's just
Yeah.
like, even if he wasn't, I wouldn't have noticed that as a kid. I wouldn't even it wouldn't even registered with me. So,
Because
yeah,
you're
no,
buying into Razor or you're buying into Scott Hall, NWO. I mean, it's mad to think that that guy never got the main title as well in any promotion. I mean, stuff like that, it just blows my mind. I only found that out a couple of years ago. I was just like, he never did win the big one. But you
no.
look at like his matches that he had at, Mania with Shawn Michaels, the ladder match and things like that, and you're thinking, you don't have to put belts on people to make them memorable. Some people just sell themselves without
Exactly. They
having to
really
have a
do.
belt or to win
Yeah.
a Royal Rumble, etc. Dom, I'm conscious that we're slowly running out of time, my friend. We've got 6 minutes left. I want to try and get this from you within 2 or 3 minutes. So,
Sure.
hypothetical here. Here's a scenario. You and I are captains of a Survivor Series team. We
Okay.
have the pleasure of picking any wrestler, male or female, in any promotion who are still with us now or who've gone to be with the Lord or who've simply retired. I've got mine, but you have to show your card first. What four other wrestlers do you have to back you up, to trust you to get you over the line at Survivor Series?
Oh my gosh. Let's see here. I think I would go. It's just one.
No, you got to choose four. You got to
I
choose
have to.
four.
Oh, I have to choose
You're the
four.
captain. You're the
Oh,
captain. You've got to choose your four team
okay.
members.
Well, I'll go with Terry Funk for sure.
Okay.
Let's see. I will definitely go. I mean, I got to throw Scott Hall in there, so he's the other
Right.
one. Who else? I'm looking at my wall of figures, maybe over here too. Uh, you know what? This is tough, man. From an ass kicking perspective, I would certainly go. I think I would go with Goldberg,
Okay.
and then I would close it out. I would go very old school, and I would do Bruno Sammartino just because
Oh,
ultimate
very
baby
good.
face. He's got that
Yeah.
fire. I would go with those three. Those
Okay.
four. How about you?
I've got to counter that then. So you've gone Terry Funk. I've got to bring in Mick Foley. I've got
There
to
you
bring
go.
in Mick Foley to try and counter the craziness on that. You've gone Scott Hall. I'm gonna have to go with the Heartbreak Kid on that, just because of the
That's great.
chemistry.
Mhm.
You went Bruno. I need somebody who's got that who can just repel that sort of slobber knocker, that sort of just no hold. Do you know what? I'm gonna pull one out the bag here. I'm gonna go Ken Shamrock, I think, with
I
that
love
one.
that.
And lastly, just because I think he is one of the greatest talents of all, certainly of this generation as well, I'm going to go Will Ospreay as well
That's
with
great.
that, because I think Will, I just don't think we've seen the best of Will. I really do. And,
I
you
agree.
know, I have Kenny Omega on the subs bench in case anybody does have to pull out, but do you know what I mean? But yeah, in that, so that's fantastic. Dom, it's been an absolute pleasure, brother. Listen, we've got just under 4 minutes. The platform's yours now. I want you to plug all your socials. Where can people get hold of you? Where can they find you? Where can they see the articles that you've written and continue to write as well?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. You can follow me on Twitter at Dominic DeAngelo. You can follow me on Instagram. I don't do a whole lot on Instagram at dom.d'angelo. But as far as anything else goes, you can see some of my write-ups on Wrestling Inc. I very active though on adfreeshows.com. So I do the interviews there. A lot of my interviews go to there. And you'll also see a show that I do with Harvard scholar Tom DeShanes. It's called In Depth, and he is a Harvard graduate. Like, he's a literary major. He's does all these like board game stuff. Amazingly smart. And he told me too on the first episode, like, he got into what he does because of pro wrestling. And so he'll dive way deep into a topic that we've done and break it apart from a scholarly perspective. And it blows my mind every time. It is fascinating. So we've done the Mega Powers, we've done the NWO, we've done sibling rivalries. It's very worth your time to check that out on ad-free shows. I think it's at I don't know which level it's at, but subscribe. I think it's at the $9. No, it's not at the $9. It might be at the $29. But check that out if you have the funds. If not, no worries. Sometimes we release those for free once in a while. And then trying to think what else I have going on. Just check out the podcast I'm a part of, the Kevin Nash podcast, Kliq This. I sit in on the Road Dogg podcast still, you didn't know. And then I also help out with Kurt Angle, and I do some of the YouTube stuff for Arn Anderson. So subscribe to the YouTubes of Kurt Angle podcast, subscribe to the YouTube of Arn Anderson podcast, because I make all those videos and you'll be able to check it out. You can see all my older stuff too on WrestleZone still. So if you want to dive into, just type in my name and just type in WrestleZone. I'm sure they'll pop up. So there you go. I covered enough bases there.
Man alive. I mean, this is like a fanboy moment, isn't it? And these are your friends. These are your work colleagues. This is just
right. It's surreal, man.
Level.
It's surreal.
Oh man, it really is. It's surreal. But listen, Dom, it's been an absolute pleasure, brother. God bless you. Thank you very much for your time. Dom, if you won't mind, obviously after the show or later on during the week, if you can just send me a tweet with those links on there, I will upload them to youtube.com/wrestlingwithfaithuk when this video goes out there as well, so people will be able to click directly on the socials. Dom, it's been a pleasure, my friend. I do hope we catch up again maybe later in the year, if and when you're free, to discuss the wrestling landscape between now and then. And it just leaves me to say, you've been listening and watching Wrestling with Faith. God bless.
God bless you. Thank you. This was great.